it's a pretty fun time.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to NeverLag. I'm Levi, that's Zach, and this is the Breakdown, the show where we take a specific game or game-related topic that we've been playing or thinking about, and we dig into it, we analyze it, we critique it.
We have a breakdown.
We have a complete and utter breakdown about the whole situation. So if you're into it, you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/NeverLag. And if you have no cash, no worries. You can support us right here by watching on YouTube, listening wherever you get your podcasts. And let's break down. This week, we're breaking down Biomutant. So if you haven't heard of it, if you played it and you loved it, we're gonna get all up in there and talk about everything that has to do with Biomutant, what we loved, what we hated. And Zach, for you, some surface thoughts here for Biomutant. What's your elevator pitch? How do you feel about it?
Yeah. So a quick elevator pitch. I think, Biomutant's action role-playing game, kind of set in a post-apocalyptic setting. So humanity has, destroyed itself. The planet is recovering. And I think the remnants of like toxic, chemicals and whatever else from humanity's reign has sort of contaminated the environment and made the creatures become sentient, and basically have a new era of these anthropomorphic animal creatures who now are exploring and ruling this planet. And so you play as some type of creature, some type of like mammal, something between a squirrel, fox, and a raccoon, perhaps, that is exploring this world. There's a lot of combat, so it kind of has like a kung fu vibe to it as well. So my elevator pitch might have something like The Last of Us meets Kung Fu Panda meets Ratchet and Clank. Something like that. It's kind of a weird game, but it's cool. So it's a big open world. A lot of action combat, both with melee, ranged combat, a lot of different main and side story quests. And it's an RPG, so you level up, you find gear, take on more powerful creatures, and unlock more abilities that can help you as you explore the world. So that's kind of, I think that's the pitch. And in terms of how I feel about it, it's a pretty fun time. I think we're talking about this game 9 months or so after it originally launched. And so, I think it's maybe had time to settle in a little bit, but I know some of the initial reactions to this game were not super positive, but I think this game's actually pretty fun. I have some problems with it. We're going to get into that. Overall, I had a good time with this game, even if I think it was maybe went on just a little bit long. So what do you think about Biomutant?
Okay, so I'm just doing a quick check here. Biomutant came out May 25th, 2021 last year. So we are closing in on a year. But yeah, about 9 months, and it's from oh shoot, I just lost who made the game.
It's a Swedish developer, I believe. Experiment 101, I think.
Experiment 101. There it is. So Experiment 101, and this was their flagship title. It was in development for quite some time. Highly anticipated. A lot of hype around this title. Released last year in May, to very, very mixed reviews, as you said. A lot of people took issue with the state of the game at launch, and also various mechanics throughout the game that maybe felt half-baked or not fully fleshed out. So there's some background for it. As for myself, my pitch would be, let's see, I had it here. It was Fallout meets Wildstar meets Dr. Seuss, and throw in a little bit of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because the narrator reminds me of the guy from that movie. But it's a very weird, very bizarre mix of things. But it worked for me on a lot of levels. I really enjoyed the character, the personality of this game. It was not it was not generic or boring in any way. Um, and I too felt that there were certainly some issues we'll get into. It maybe overstayed its welcome a touch. But at the end of the day, I think this is a pretty excellent first stab at a game from the studio, especially one that's more indie, kind of a double A studio. I think they may have overreached, but at the same time, they kind of shot for the stars, and even though they didn't hit, they were able to really accomplish something I felt was impressive. There were things in this game that I felt were better quality than a lot of AAA titles we see today. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, let's go ahead and let's just kind of start at the beginning. Huh? How did you feel about the character creator
The
when you
character
start up?
creator, yeah, it was really cool. It kind of allowed you to have like this sliding scale to adjust your character, which made it super easy to like make your head big or your chest broad, and you could kind of slide your little thing around to the different types of qualities that you want, whether you want to be stronger or more brainy. And you could you kind of have like a diagram or like a shape which each point has one of these qualities, and you can drag and drop around that and kind of find the right mix of what you're going for, which was kind of an interesting idea. um, Good amount of customization options, so it felt from the start like you could really make the weird little rat creature of your choice, and decide kind of
Of your
how to
dreams.
optimize of your dreams, decide how to optimize their build. And there's a few different classes you can pick as well. So I ended up going with Deadeye, which is kind of a ranged melee mix where you start with a sword, but you also have a gun, and later on you can unlock either dual swords or dual guns. So a little bit of versatility, which is why I chose it. But pretty good character creator. I really liked that process. How about you?
Yeah, yeah, I did too. Every game, every game has to have a character creator, right, of this type, and a lot of times it's sliding bars and numbers, and it gets the job done. But I thought this was visually much more pleasing, and it kind of simplifies the whole thing. You don't have to overthink about all these numbers or whatever. Like you mentioned, it's a circle, and you can drag a point anywhere around the circumference of the circle, and at various points it'll be max intellect, max strength, and then you can also drag the point anywhere within the circle to create a combination of all these different attributes. And it's just such a simple representation of that concept we've seen over and over again throughout the years. um, I really enjoyed it because for people like me, I sit down and I look at these character creators and I spend way too much time agonizing over these stupid numbers that in the end really don't mean anything. If you take that away from me, I don't even see the numbers. I'm just dragging a point around a circle and looking at what it does to um, the physical appearance of my character. It really simplifies that process, makes it a bit more fun and less tedious. Um, so I enjoyed that a lot. You know, you drag your point all the way down to intellect, and your character's head gets all bulbous and completely oversized for its body, and then you drag it up to the top to strength, and they become this super muscular, beefy squirrel rat dude. That was a lot of fun. Choosing the colors and the different aesthetic options for your character, I thought was plenty. I enjoyed that as well. And then, like you said, there are different classes in this game. Once you select all of that, there's 6 or 7 classes. There was one that was DLC, and for the most part, these classes, you can, once you get into the game, you can build your character however you want from that point. Like a lot of these tend to be, it's just a starting point. But every class does have a specific trait that you'll be able to unlock later in the game, which is exclusive to that class. So, for example, you picked Deadeye. I'm pretty sure Deadeye's trait later in the game that you can unlock is a perk that allows your guns to deal double damage, which is like a huge, huge bonus to your gunplay, right? So each class has something like that that really kind of points you towards what that class is supposed to be doing, and you can't change that once you've selected your class. So bear that in mind if you're starting up. Maybe you can do a quick search of what perks come with which classes, but each one kind of specializes in you know, whether it be melee, range, or there's another class that's more of a has like psi powers where electricity from its fingers and stuff like that. So there's a pretty good variety on offer as well. All in all, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Great impression for me to start, and I ended up picking the psionic class. I can't remember what they were
Psi
called. Do
Freak, I
you?
think. Yeah.
Psi Freak. I
Psi
picked the
Freak,
Psi
Deadeye.
Freak and
Yeah.
made the big bulbous head rat. And
Yeah.
you went Deadeye. And what did you go for your physical attributes or anything like
Um,
that?
yeah, I went for kind of a mix of strength, agility, and so like you said, you can choose where you want to spend your level up. Like when you level up, you get um, you know an amount of points you can put into one of your attributes. So you can customize your build pretty well. Because again, I chose Deadeye. It was focused mostly on melee to start, melee and gunplay to start. By the end, I had actually leveled up my intelligence quite a bit, which a lot like that's what goes towards your psionic type abilities. Um, and so I kind of had a mix of a character who was melee, gunplay, as well as like doing the electricity from your fingers. Now I didn't have the whatever perk comes with the psionic class. I had the Deadeye perk, but other than the class specific perks, you can customize a lot. So I kind of ended up going a route where I focused a lot on strength and intelligence by the end, and I used my range combat as well. But that's kind of the mix I did.
Okay, yeah, yeah, you can definitely go hybrid and do whatever you want, especially if you're not trying to min max this game, right? It's a single player
Mm-hmm.
game, and quite frankly, the difficulty isn't that high. You can adjust it if you want as well. Um, yeah, the I just remembered the Psi Freak perk that came with my class was so broken towards endgame because what it the perk was essentially it, any damage done by your power abilities, which is any psionic ability. So basically, what you're mostly using in combat, any damage done by that perk healed you. so so essentially, I could just take infinite damage and just continually reheal through every fight. It was pretty insane. So if you want to break the game, that might work. But Deadeye's also pretty good, I hear. So um, okay, so quick PSA though, also for those of you starting out, we are going to get pretty spoilery heading in from here on out, but a huge quality of life thing to keep in mind if you're going to play this game, um, adjust the narrator. Definitely adjust the
Mm-hmm.
narrator. They had this thing tuned up the wazoo, and the narrator just talks constantly. That was actually one of the main complaints I remember from launch was people are like, just this narrator will not shut up. He's ruining the game. And since launch, they've added a sliding scale. You can adjust how often, how frequently the narrator speaks when you're in the open world and when you're just wandering about exploring. And then you can also turn the narrator off, which works anytime you are speaking with a character in game. Uh, the narrator will literally narrate what they're saying in kind of a third person way that's a little strange. You can turn that off so that instead what happens is these characters will just kind of mumble some incoherent like nonsense. It's actually pretty humorous to listen to, and then you can just read what it is that they're saying and you don't have the narrator talking over it. I found that to be um, incredibly helpful. I can't imagine my impression of this game would be as high as it is if I had to listen to the narrator talk as much as he would if you had everything turned up. So
Yeah, I
bear that
played
in mind.
I played with the narrator turned tuned normally or by default for the first probably quarter of the game, and it was infuriating. At one point, I just turned the sound down before I realized you could turn the narrator down, and I was like, I'll just play this without sound because it's driving me insane. And it's not that the narrator was bad; it was just so much. And I think I'm still some minor gripes around delivery of dialogue overall. I like the gibberish sounds the creatures made, and I think turning down the narrator, you actually got to hear that. And I think a nice touch was that some of the different creatures would have different types of gibberish and sounds, which was cool. Um, it's still kind of talked in a narratory voice, so like they would be saying gibberish, and then their little subtitle would say something like, "This character thinks that you should go look for this thing," and it just felt very like third person kind of omniscient and removed from the situation, which for me like hindered the immersion a little bit. But if you at least turn the narrator way down, and you can kind of get past that a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know it didn't work as well for you, but turning the narrator off for me, I didn't mind the way it was written because it will say like they think this. To me, once the narrator was gone, it just kind of felt like you talking to yourself about what the character had said. You know, kind of you
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it before you respond. So that issue was alleviated for me. I guess your mileage may vary there. And like you said, the narrator isn't bad. He didn't do a bad job. In fact, for a while he's kind of entertaining, and you will still hear him on like main story beats. He you can't turn him off completely, but it's infrequent enough that at that point you can enjoy him. He does sound like, if you've ever seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or played Little Big Planet, he's kind of this dry British uh, voice that, I don't know. It's not charming. Like it, he did a good job. It's just
Yeah,
it's used way too heavily
it
throughout the
was
game,
like,
and
you know,
it
it's like seasoning. Like a little bit of salt is fantastic. You put salt all over your food, you know, inside your burger, inside the bun. This metaphor is breaking down.
have you ever
You get what I'm
cooked
saying.
before?
You put the salt shaker right in the middle of that burger, and it's not fun for anybody.
Exactly. British people are just like salt. Okay.
That's right. Now we've
So
alienated our British fan base. So
yeah.
whoops.
Well, what can you do? Um, so let's talk about graphics. We played this for some reference. I should have said this at the beginning. This is the 1.07 patch of the game. I do believe it's probably the last patch. I tried to do some research. There's really no news about any more updates coming to this game that I was able to find. So it's likely this is how the game will stay. Um, and in addition, we played this game on PC, and we have pretty high end rigs. So again, your mileage will vary depending on where you play this. As of now, there is not a current gen upgrade for the console versions, whether you're on Xbox or PlayStation. The only versions available are, actually there might be an Xbox Series X version. So double check on that. But I know for a fact there is no PS5 native version, so you will still be playing the PS4 version, which is a bummer. I do really hope that they address that because they might be able to get a good second wind out of that. And those who didn't play it because of that will have a much better experience now that the game has had these tweaks and is in a much better state, in our opinion. So, with that in mind, we played this on PC. Graphics wise, I'll let you go. How did you feel about performance and appearance of this game?
Yeah, on a high end PC, it looks mostly really great. You know, it's a big world, and so you have some nice long draw distances, some nice skyboxes. Especially you get to some of the higher vantage points, and you can see mountains and cliff sides off into the distance. Um, Really high quality foliage. So the grass, like different types of grasses in particular, looked really good. They kind of swayed with the wind, not the most organically. At times, some of these textures felt a touch artificial to me, but for the most part, they still looked really good and had a lot of detail and quality. Fur, like the fur on the creatures, especially if you drag up like the settings to max everything out, looked super detailed and was really cool. And I thought the colors were pretty vibrant and looked good. Um, I occasionally had some pop in at kind of a medium distance, not super often, but enough that I was able to kind of mentally file it away, and I captured a couple of times that it was happening, but it was far enough out that it didn't like fully take you out of the game. It wasn't as bad as like Elden Ring on PS5's pop in by any means, but there was some pop in. And I did occasionally get some frame drops and stutters, not super frequently, but it would happen, once in a great while. So pretty good performance overall. I think it was acceptable. And for a first time studio, especially, I feel like they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I would concur. For myself, I thought this game was incredibly impressive visually. When I first booted it up, I was actually kind of astonished at how good the game looks. I mean, we're talking again on PC. I'm running a 3080 and a 5900 Ryzen CPU, so pretty high end stuff. But um, it really, I mean, it looked next gen. It looked more next gen than these next gen games we've been getting right now,
Mm-hmm.
and very impressive from the studio. I thought the grass, the foliage, the environments, regularly throughout my playthrough, I was kind of just taken by the environments or the various atmospheres I was in, panning the camera around, taking screenshots, taking video. That regularly happened throughout my playthrough. So I was very impressed with it visually. I did notice a little bit of pop-in, but to me it was very acceptable. It was pretty far away. I mean, we're talking, I'd have to guess, hundreds of feet in the distance. If you can see a big open valley, maybe on the hill in the background, I could see where that grass was kind of coming in. Um, but I think that's pretty much, I don't know. It's hard to ask for much better than that with this much detail in a game, and it wasn't enough, like you said, with some of these recent games where you couldn't look away from you could very
Mm-hmm.
much put it out of mind. And then I did have some frame drops a little bit. Ironically, it tended to happen in the smaller towns in buildings. I don't know if that was the case for you. It was weird. I would be out in the open and, you know, long draw distances I could see from miles, and I'd be getting a steady 60 frames. And then I would go into a building and my frames would drop to in the 50s, 40s, and it would get a little choppy.
Interesting.
It was very area. It seemed like it was very area specific and not so much having to do with load. Like almost just certain areas weren't quite optimized correctly or something. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious if you noticed. Did you notice any regularity with your frame drops, or was it sporadic?
I didn't notice any strong patterns, but again, that's because it didn't happen that frequently. So when it happens more frequently, it's easy to be like, oh, it's happening again at this place. So I think that kind of speaks to the irregularity of it. But I didn't
Okay.
notice that. That's interesting. I did notice there are a couple of areas that felt less stable overall. There are one or two of the areas that I remember getting a frame drop in shortly around that time frame. I noticed a weird texture issue where like there was like a texture from the ground popping up out of the ground. It was like this weird flat, like green color. It was like levitating over the hills. And it was, for a second, I thought I was running through like this murky green water. And then I realized I think a texture's broken because this doesn't look like it's supposed to be here. And I continued exploring the area, and it would occasionally, certain areas, it'd be like just a flat, like two-dimensional green angle or plane, like it was just pulled out of the ground. And I ended up, after like an hour occasionally seeing this, and there's like two areas this happened. I ended up turning off the game, rebooting it, and then it didn't happen again as far as I can remember. So maybe there were some areas that were not fully optimized, that maybe that's where the frame drops were happening too.
Yeah. So I think by and large you will be impressed with this game visually if you're on PC. Um, and then on console, keep in mind again you'll have the last gen versions. But and then to speak to the fur effects, like you said, actually very like some of the best looking hair or fur I've seen in any game. If you crank that setting up to max, and pretty much
Mm-hmm.
every single character, every single enemy in this game has just an abundance of fur. They're very furry creatures throughout this world, and so you will constantly be seeing it on everything. And it looked very good. It too was quite impressive, I thought.
If you want that good fur, that good fur, Biomutant on PC is where it's at.
Oh no, oh no, don't do that to this. Don't do that to this podcast.
No, what?
um
That's completely innocent. There's no way that could be
yeah, I don't.
misconstrued. If you love furries,
The internet has
this
never
is for you.
misconstrued anything. You are correct.
That's right.
So, going from graphics, huge plus for me, and I think from you too. I think it was very impressive in that department. Um, how do you feel? So let's talk a little bit without going into too much detail about gameplay mechanics and things. Just the world in general, the map size, the various settings. How did you feel about the world?
Yeah, overall positive. It's a pretty big map. A lot of my issues related to the size of the map have more to do with, I think, execution and content within the map. The map itself is like the different biomes, the geography itself is pretty great. and the map is a utility is also real. Mostly, I have one kind of major nitpick about the map, but for the most part, the map is, it looks really good. You can see the different areas. You can zoom in and out. It's appealing aesthetically. Um, and then yeah, the different regions were cool. They were mostly distinct. There were a few that blended together in my mind, but most of them have a distinct feeling. I think my favorite biome was kind of in the center of the map, the northern center. There's this big tree, and there's these green fields around it with like rivers and small waterfalls and like rocky outcroppings, and it's just very pretty. And I stopped a couple of times just to admire the scenery, take screenshots and video clips. I'll drop a couple here in the video. Um, and I really love that area. And there's a few other areas that are really nice too. Like some you're in these mountainous areas and you can see really far and see hills and cliff sides in the distance. And it's a pretty grand map in its scale. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And the colors, I think I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of good use of colors for the most part. So you're in like a rocky or mountain area, and it kind of has more reds and oranges and feels a little bit like something you might see in the southwestern United States. Whereas you center of the map, it's a bit more like plains and rivers and it's just very nice variation in the different places you get to go. So I liked it. What did you think about the world? Where was your favorite places?
Um, to speak real quick to the color, definitely very colorful game. It kind of feels like they cranked the saturation up, but not in a way that's distracting. It's just a very
In a
uh,
good way.
good looking, colorful game, very vibrant. I was at first I was very impressed at the size of the map. Once again, I just went into this game with pretty low expectations based on the feedback at launch, knowing it was a smaller studio, knowing it was their first game. Um, the map is pretty enormous, actually. So that was, I mean, that can go both ways. Like you said, we'll talk about it. But as far as just the actual real estate and size of the map, I was impressed. I thought it looked great. Like you said, every environment was very pleasing to explore. The green fields and grassy hills, and I loved the in that area you're talking about near the tree, all those grassy hills. I love those trees that were everywhere. Those
Mm-hmm.
specifically reminded me of Dr. Seuss for some reason. But
Yeah.
I think my favorite area was to the southeast. There is um, an archipelago type
Mm-hmm.
place full of islands, and later on you get the ability to better explore that area. And I just really enjoyed this um, Caribbean-esque environment, almost kind of mixed with some very precipitous, we'll say, very
Ooh,
these cliffs jutting out of the water, kind of almost like
it's a
you
five
know,
dollar word.
there you go, almost like you would have over in Thailand or something. Like it was kind of that mix of things, and I really enjoyed just the optics of that environment, the turquoise or the very crystal
Mm-hmm.
blue water. That was probably my favorite. But yeah, the world was impressive. It was there's a lot to explore. There's a lot to uncover here. We'll get into some nitpicks because with the size of the map comes great responsibility, right? As we find in
Right.
other games. So and then to speak to the actual map, which is incredibly important. I have docked games a point because of their in-game map.
Mm-hmm.
It's very cool. You open it up and it's actually um, it's a pretty accurate visual representation of the map. It doesn't look like a 2D surface, like an actual piece of paper map. It's much more like if you had a drone and you went out, way up into the sky and you were looking down.
It's kind of like
You can actually,
Google Earth view, where you zoom in
yeah,
and out a little bit, and you can see some of the textures and some of the like outlines of various landmarks.
yeah. So I thought the map was really cool. It does suffer a little bit from having icons everywhere. I'm a little bit over that in games, but I'm curious, what was your main complaint about the map?
My main complaint, so you have a little cursor on the map, right? You can drag that around to hone in on things. And because you unlock so many different places on the map, Sometimes there would be dots that are really close together, and there's a limit to how far in you can zoom. Occasionally, you have a couple of different points of interest right next to each other, and some of those are for fast traveling. Others are like other things on the map, and the cursor kind of has this magnetic thing where when you get to a point of interest, it like locks onto it, and you have to like pull the controller just a little bit to like unlock it or unmagnetize it, I guess is the best way to say it. But when these things are really close together, it's like to the amount of effort you have to pull the controller joystick to move the cursor moves it past the other one. And so if there's a slightly bigger point of interest, sometimes it can be hard to like get it to lock on to the right point so that you can then like hit fast travel or whatever. It wasn't deal breaking. It didn't happen all the time, but it was like moderately annoying here and there. So I wish they had either not had the magnetizing effect or had some way to account for that, because that functionally bothered me on multiple occasions. But it's not the end of the world.
Okay. I kind of wondered if that might have been what it was, but I didn't really run into an issue with that because anywhere where there was something so closely grouped together that the magnetization was a problem, um, I found that I could just click anywhere and fast travel to that area. Like let's say there's a fast travel as well as some merchant icons and things. I never felt like I had to be too specific. I would just drag over to that area and hit fast travel. I never had to think about it. So I guess I just never ran into the specific use case that you had, but maybe they could have added like you can use the analog stick to move around. And then
Right.
once you get to a specific clump, maybe use the D-pad to kind of cycle through different
Yeah.
smaller icons.
Exactly. Something like that would have solved it, because it wasn't just fast traveling, because I think it would default to the fast travel option. So maybe I'm getting that mixed up, but I think the other thing that would happen is a lot of times you'd have multiple side quests and main quests all really close together, and trying to like get to the correct quest so that you could track it so that you're heading in the right direction. It was just that kind of thing. It was, yeah, again, it wasn't a deal breaker, but I wish they had it just like what you said would have been perfect. I didn't need it to be the sleekest thing ever, but um, moderate nitpick, but it's not the end of the world.
Okay. So yeah, I think overall we're both positive on the world, on the map. Goes in the plus column as well.
Yeah,
From there, I guess let's. I think the easiest thing to go into would be traversal of the world.
that's
Right, you're in the
that's what
world.
I was gonna say.
There you go.
Traversal.
So let's talk a little bit about all manner of traversal, how you get around this world from beginning to late game, as
Hmm.
well as we'll mix in slash at the end come around to some of these different vehicles you're able to obtain. So,
Yeah.
how did you feel in general about traversal at the outset? Before you have all your toys, and then later on as you get more ways to get around this place.
Yeah, mostly positive, across the board. So to start out, you obviously don't have any mounts of any kind or any vehicles, um, but I've found sprinting to be pretty quick. You're a quick little rodent. I'll say that much. So you hold down on you kind of click down the left joystick that you use to move, like many games, and you start sprinting. You get on all fours and just scurry. Like your life depends on it, and
Even
it's
if your
quick.
head is abnormally bulbous, you still run very fast. It's
Good to
impressive.
know. Good to know.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so just the speed at which you sprint felt pretty dang quick, to the point where I didn't even always get out my mounts later if I was running around,
Yeah,
just because
I was gonna say
sprinting
that
was so
same.
fast, which is
Hmm.
almost is like maybe a slight knock against the mounts, which we can talk about in a
Hmm.
minute. But the sprinting was so fast, and I love that. I love being able to get around a map quickly. So that was great. Moving around as a creature felt really good. I rarely had any issues. Like the one thing I'll say bothers me about traversal, I think this is true of both land mounts and as just a when you're just running around with your character, but I certainly seemed to experience it even more with my character. Is kind of the classic thing that happens in games these days, where some slopes you can't really run up, but visually it looks like you should be able to, but you'll just get stuck or you'll slide down. And I'm not against there being certain barriers, like not everything has to be Breath of the Wild, not everything has to be climbable, although that's kind of nice sometimes. But it's frustrating when the slope is like not that severe and you're like, I totally can run up this, especially when there are other areas where you run up slopes of a similar height, so your brain thinks you should do this, and then you get stuck and you're like, well, now I have to go around this very modest size hill because I can't go up this hill for some reason. So some of that weirdness, occasionally you could jank your way up something, but I found that you often couldn't if there was that limitation. So this wasn't a huge deal. It didn't happen that often, I think, but that was my biggest issue with just general traversal running around. It could happen on mounts too. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Before we get into like the different types of mounts and vehicles, curious what you think.
Yeah, so I agree completely with you on the just the bare bones traversal, the sprinting. Um, my first takeaway was, wow, this is very quick. And I had the same thing as you, where early on you do get a mount, and I didn't use the mount for a lot of probably the first third of the game very much because I was truly under the impression that it was barely faster than sprinting. And later in the game, I did find that there is a perk too where you can increase the mount speed by 5%, which I was like, that's not that much.
That
But
should have been at least 15, if
I
not
know,
like
I if I
25.
had one thing I would tweak about it, I would say that the mount speed should have been base maybe 10% faster, and then you could unlock 5 to 10 more after that. But I wouldn't change anything about the sprint speed. And overall, at the end of the day, I came around to it, and I think that it could have been much worse. I think they did a pretty good job if they had just tweaked the mount speed a little bit. I did find later in the game the mount speed was fast enough to justify it over long distances. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely was faster. Um, and quite frankly, being able to sprint quick is so
Yeah.
useful. I mean, more often than not, you're going to just be sprinting from place to place instead of calling your mount, getting on it, right? So
Yeah.
it's great that that had the functionality and the speed that it did. Um,
I wouldn't
and
change
then
the sprint speed either, but I think the other issue with the mount is one, it wasn't quite fast enough that you always wanted to call it. The other issue is it's kind of the old school open world approach where you call your mount and then a second later it comes up behind you and you have to turn your character around, press
yeah,
Y
for sure.
or triangle to hop on it, and then you could go. And it's like we're in an age now where it's like, can you just summon it right under me in an instant? Like I don't need the immersion of like going to the stable and
Right. This
untethering my
isn't Red
horse.
Dead Redemption 2. Like,
Right.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree that contributed to it, right? If I'm going a couple hundred yards, is it worth it to summon the horse and wait for it
Mm-hmm.
and jump on it and then go? And by the end, I probably broke even, right? I should have just taken off.
Yeah.
So, but I came around to it. Like I said, by the end, I kind of realized, okay, mounts are for long distances, which makes sense. Like that makes sense
Yeah.
anyways. I think we get so used to going anywhere in any game. Oh, let me hop on my mount. And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
this game kind of takes a different approach. If you're going a long distance, it makes sense to get the mount out. If not, then we've made your sprint speed fast enough that you're not going to be frustrated. So I thought that was great. I did come up against the gentle hills that you couldn't quite run up sometimes. It's one of those things where the physics of the game, the animations of the game just don't line up with what it visually looks like, and you're like, I
Yeah.
should be able to run up this, but I can't. That's frustrating. It was very minimal. One other thing you didn't really touch on that I want to bring up is not long into the game you do get a glider, very Breath of the Wild esque, um, which is awesome. I'm glad they had it. Without it, this game would have suffered in moments. My frustration with it was it didn't glide as well as I would like. Right? It was more
Agreed.
of it was almost like a parachute rather than a glider, is what
Yeah.
it felt like a lot of times.
The descent was too quick. Like
Yeah,
you don't retain your height as well. So if you'd be on the top of a mountain and you're like, I want to glide down to that field, and based on other games with gliders, you might be able to make it pretty far. With this one, you descend so quickly, you might just hit the bottom of the hill you were on, and then
yeah.
you
You
still
want to
have to run
glide. You want to
across it.
glide like this, but it was more like that, and that's going
Right.
to make no sense to our audio listeners. But we're talking a more
Yeah.
severe angle at which you descend, right? So, um, that was my complaint there. But at the end of the day, it was also marginal. You're able to get around the world pretty well, and there is a mount you can actually find that glides a little bit better. But I would argue it's not worth pulling out for the few times that you might use it. So let's
Mm-hmm.
get into from there. Let's get into the actual mounts. Not long into the game, you're able to feed and make friends with these lovable Dr. Seuss, weird looking, bizarre creatures, and ride them around this glorious world.
The Susian
Uh,
beasts.
Yeah. So do you have what thoughts do you have about the actual mounts in the game?
Yeah, they were cool. I liked all of them. They're kind of weird creatures, all very Dr. Seuss esque, kind of bizarre but cute. And I can't remember the names of the various mounts that I tamed, but I liked a
Oh
lot of them.
goodness, no. Yeah.
Um, but they were good. The mount taming process was fine. Like there are these certain like seeds or berries you could find in the wild in a little plant, and if you grabbed it, you could then use that to essentially tame any mount that's rideable. And then from there, you have it. One thing that I noticed is it seemed like you could only have one tamed ground mount at a time, unless I was doing this wrong. Where you summon your mount and it's whatever the most recent mount is. But I didn't find a way to like go back and
There is a way.
access. Okay, so I'm just
If you
I'm just
go
an
if you
idiot
go
there.
to
But
the, you know how you go to the pause menu and you have the four quadrants, the top is the map.
yeah,
In the map there's something called, let me pull it up right here, transport. It's under a tab called
transport. Okay,
transport, and it has all of your ground mounts, and you can
got it.
select which one is summoned when you call it.
I wish they had made that a little more clear because I didn't figure that out. I didn't look super hard, but I could see others having that issue where basically I went and tamed a new mount and I couldn't find my old mount on my little selection wheel. What was confusing about that is the selection wheel has like
He
eight
died.
slots. Yeah, yeah, he's gone. The selection wheel has like eight slots, so I was like, oh, I guess, and I only had two or three filled at that point. So it's like, I guess you just override whatever your mount is. I didn't care that much, so I didn't really look into it. So it wasn't a huge deal. But if you want to be able to call back various mounts or have like collect them all, I guess you can. So
There
issue
you go.
solved
I
for
did
me.
I did care, and I looked it up because I was like, I don't want this piece of trash mount that I just found. I want my old best friend mount.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do that. Another thing to shout out is that, so a lot of these mounts are very you know, quadruped, horse, kind of goat like. Some of them maybe, I don't know. There's one that's a little buffalo like. I don't know. They're all very
Mm-hmm.
similar in that animal family, but later on in the game, you are able to find some more bizarre mounts.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a little bat squirrel, and that's the one that glides better than your glider. The problem is, um, there's also one that's a hand, which is really cool. Like, I don't know if
Yeah,
you
the
ever
hand was
unlocked
neat.
that one.
I
Yeah,
did.
so it's a
Yeah.
mechanical hand, and you ride around on it, and it crawls like an actual hand. But it also has versatility in that it can be used in combat. If you try to attack with it,
Like
it'll like get
shoot
on its side and like shoot like this,
finger gun.
or like
Yeah.
flick things, which is really cool in concept. But at the time I unlocked it, it was weaker than any of my abilities,
Yeah.
and also
Same.
slower than any other mount. So I wish that they had made some of the more unique mounts still usable as just mounts, because the
Yeah.
coolest ones I found in the game had their kind of niche use, but it wasn't powerful enough to use it that way, and also wasn't fast enough to use as a mount. So in the end, you really couldn't use it.
Yeah, I only used the hand a couple of times for that reason, and I wish they'd either made it more powerful or like scale, because I found that pretty late in the game. I wish they had made it scale better, or maybe there is a way. I don't know if there's a way to upgrade the mounts or not, but give me a way to upgrade
I
it or
don't think
something.
so.
Yeah, because I agree. I would have loved to have rode that thing around because it was so weird. But I only used it briefly.
Yeah. So yeah, there you have it. Getting around the world is overall a positive as well. It feels good to do. And there's kind of tools at your disposal for any moment to moment gameplay you might be encountering. Um, and then from there, let's kind of talk about these. There's these different vehicles you're able to create, which are in the mount family, but they're more specific to each zone, right? There's different kind of quadrants of the map and different bosses in each quadrant. And
Hmm.
depending on whether you're in the archipelago or you're in kind of like this tar ridden post apocalyptic everything's dead area, there are these different vehicles that through the story you're able to craft, and then you can use only in these specific areas.
Hmm.
Which of the, how many are there? Are there four or three? Which one was your favorite? Which one
There's
stands
at
out to you?
least, I think there's three, but I could be wrong, and maybe there's four. They all kind of stood out to me. I mean, the first one I unlocked was the archipelago one, the goo glider, which is like a little jet ski sort of thing. Um, and that lets you traverse like water. One of my initial complaints was that trying to traverse water drains your energy really quick, and once your energy is drained, you die. And it's pretty fast. So you try and cross what seems like a feasible distance, and you drown. Super annoying at first. Once you get the goo glider, it's not that bad of a deal anymore. Um, then the tar area, you get like a mech that lets you suck up tar, and it also like protects you from environments that have like hypoxia, or kind of like a lack of breathable air or something. um, and then later you get kind of another aquatic like octopod type thing. One
Yeah.
frustration I had is there were times where I felt like I was supposed to be able to use those mounts elsewhere, and it took me a while to figure out that I couldn't. A good example of this is the little Goo Glide jet ski thing. There are future points where I was in a river and I was drowning, and I was like, I'll pull out my Goo Glide so that I can, get to the other side. And it's like, you can't summon this here. I'm like, why can't I use my jet ski in this river versus that river? And then I drowned.
You were in the water?
Yeah, in like a in
That's
a
probably why you can't summon it while you're swimming.
yeah, you can.
You can?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wasn't able to.
yeah. You hop in the
You're
water.
positive?
Yeah, it's mostly
All
how I
right,
did it.
someone's gonna have to fact check this because I thought you
I
could only
will.
summon it
I
when you're
will
standing on the
show.
shore.
I will show a video right here of
Please
me
do.
doing it.
Please do.
That's mostly how I did it. And
Okay.
I got in the habit because the archipelago is the first big zone that I completed. So I got in the habit of there's water everywhere. I jump in the water, pull out my little guy, and then just go, or my
Oh,
little
interesting.
goo glide. And then later I would be like on the northern area of the map, there'd be lakes or rivers, and I'd jump into like a lake and start swimming, go to pull out my thing, and it's like, you can't summon this here. And from an immersion standpoint, maybe some of these make more sense, like the octopod's like an undersea type thing, so it kind of makes sense that you can't pull that out on land, or even in a river it might not be deep enough. But for your little goo glider, it feels like I should be able to use this in any river, right? So that was frustrating on multiple accounts for me. But other than that, I mean, they were pretty cool. The mech was probably my least favorite. Didn't have any issues with it per se, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think about the unique zone uh, mounts?
Yeah, before I get into it, I have one question. Were you in like a toxic water area
I don't think so.
that you can recall? Because the only limitations I remember finding on the Goo Glide were depending on the different. So a little context here for all of these vehicles. You do the story, you unlock the vehicle, right? Whether it's the Goo Glide, which is kind of like a jet ski, very cool looking, like a Star Wars jet ski, right? There's the mech ton, which is a big mech that you get inside and walk around in, right? There is the Gull blimp, which you use in the northern region, which
Right.
is actually really cool. I kind of wish you could use that elsewhere. I thought it worked really well. It was very seamless. I mean, you call
Hmm.
this massive blimp, and then a rope drops down. You climb up the rope, and you can just fly over the entire zone and then drop down wherever you want. It was very cool. Um, and then, like you said, the octopod. Yeah, I have it right here, which you get to use very briefly.
Yeah.
But for especially for the Mechton and the Goo Glide, you're able to customize these, and you find different boxes throughout the world that give you upgrade components for them, and then you can customize them. So, um, anyways, all of this tailing back around to the Goo Glide, depending on the level of the different pieces that you build your Goo Glide with, you can enter certain
Hmm.
toxicities of water, right? If
Yeah.
your Goo Glide is level 1, you can't go into anything beyond like pure water. And then once your Goo Glide reaches level 3, you can go everywhere. So
Yeah. Mine was at
who
level
knows? Maybe
three.
that
So
had something to do with it.
it did not, because
Okay.
mine was
Well,
level
then never
three.
mind.
Yeah. So, because that's what I mean. It was like a river. It was not an area that was toxic. It was just like a river in a chill area. And it'd be like, you can't summon this here. And it was like, what? So, I
I
don't,
mean, you try and ride a jet ski through a rocky river.
but it was like a big river. It was like super far across. So,
It was a
I don't,
big river.
yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, there's definitely we're gonna get into there is some jank in this game. As far as the vehicles go, I thought the Mechton was cool. I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I did run into a visual glitch with the Mechton. I actually have in my notes that I thought it was really cool, but I was frustrated later to find a visual glitch where one of the components of the mech is like its back piece, its backpack, its whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And mine was visually stuck with what I had started with. And no matter what I switched it to, it just would clip through the original back piece. So it would be like both of them just this amorphous blob. And it was a small thing,
Interesting.
but kind of frustrating. Sounds like you didn't run into that, huh? So I don't know what caused that for me.
I didn't upgrade my mech a whole lot though, so that might be why.
Okay. The Goo Glide I thought was absolutely awesome. One of my favorite, like I said, the archipelago was one of my favorite zones visually. And then also traversing it, I thought was awesome. Going from island to island, hopping on your Star Wars jet ski and just zooming around, and the water looked fantastic. You can get some cool, quirky upgrades for it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my favorite vehicle in the game. I really enjoyed anytime I got to use that. So all in all, I liked it. It does feel, we will get into this probably starting here very soon. It does feel like a few of these were half baked. Like, why does the Goo Glide and the Mech-Ton have a bunch of customization options? And then the Mech-Ton, it seems to indicate that the customization options will impact your gameplay, but it doesn't. So it kind of feels like that got shelved. And then you have other vehicles later in the game, like the Blimp, that have no customization whatsoever and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
function as what they are. So it does feel like some of these things didn't quite get the time that maybe they initially intended to use on
Yeah.
them. Um, and so, yeah, all in all, I thought it was great. The Goo Glide was fantastic. The Octopod was really cool at the end. You use it for literally like 5 minutes for a boss fight. And I wish you got to use it more. Maybe if there was some exploration in the lake, in the archipelago, or different things, I felt like they could have used that more because it was
Yeah.
very fun to control. Very cool. And then, quick shout out to, I don't know if you did this, there's a side quest in the game where you can unlock a giant furry whale shark as a mount instead of your Goo Glide. Did you
I
do that?
don't I don't think I did that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's
cool. It's a pretty short quest. It starts way up in the north, and there's this
okay.
giant furry whale. And I'll send you. You'll be able to put some video of it in here, and it
That
moves
sounds cool.
very fast. Pretty cool. So there's some really cool. Lots of imagination in this game. It feels like for everything that they weren't able to do due to time or budget, they really were able to pack a ton of imagination and just not really say no to anything. You know, if it
Yeah.
sounds cool, if it sounds fun, they threw it in this game. So,
Right. Which is like
um,
it's a double-edged sword because there's a lot of fun little surprises, but you can also feel that they couldn't properly execute on many of them as well as you can tell they intended to, which is it's a bummer. I think, but it's a first studio and they bit off. I think they just bit off a lot more than they could chew. But I think it bodes well for future games if they get a better sense of what they're capable of in certain time frames, getting better at constraining themselves just a little bit while still having some of the imagination and ambition. I could imagine their second game being a much more polished and more balanced, but still being fun and imaginative. So it's a pro and a con, I think, for this game.
yeah, yeah, as are I think many things in this game. But from there, let's see here. I guess from there, let's talk a little bit about. Well, we'll move to combat in a second, but for now, the actual moment-to-moment gameplay of exploring various worlds. Let's talk about puzzles, exploring towns, looting,
Mm-hmm.
everything you're doing in the world that isn't combat. Anything you have to say? Any comments on that?
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah. Um, now I forgot. I don't have anything to say. I'm just excited.
Never mind.
um, Moment to moment gameplay was mostly good. It starts out pretty strong, and then over time, some of the moment to moment gameplay becomes a bit repetitive and tiresome as you get later in the game because it kind of feels like it's drawing out over too long and they didn't add enough variance in some areas. But overall, it was pretty good. Starting with like towns and settlements, I think there's for new towns and settlements there's usually a combat piece where you go in, you have to fight some bad guys and basically take it over, turn it green on your map, and then it becomes a town or a settlement. um, we'll talk about the combat later, but overall most of the normal settlements the combat wasn't super interesting to get into it. And then I felt that a lot of these settlements were very samey, especially if they were like fortresses or villages. Their layouts were often pretty cookie cutter. There were a few that were different, but a lot of copy paste. So what that ended up meaning is I spent hardly any time in the villages. I just quickly see, is there any chests in here to unlock or to find stuff? Are there any people with quests that I want to pick up real quick? Do I need to sell anything? And then I'd be on my way, which is probably what you do in a settlement anyway. But from an immersion standpoint, I think they were a little bit lacking, but not like obstructive in any way. And then in terms of like looting stuff, looting was pretty satisfying. There's chests, excuse me, chests all over. They'd glow with different colors depending on the rarity of the item that was inside. And it mostly felt good to loot stuff. Some of the specific gear was kind of hit or miss for me. Like there were some cool things. There were a lot of things I didn't care about, which maybe is par for the course with an open world anyway. But the actual active looting felt about as good as it usually does in games like this. And I think kind of the glowing yellow or green or red kind of indicating the rarity of a given item. That there's something about the color glowing with certain items that triggers something in our brains that is like, ooh, I need to go get that. And then
Ooh,
it's
it's
a
orange.
and then it's a plastic handle or something. And then I'm like,
Yeah, right.
whatever. So I don't know. What about you in terms of like that kind of the loop of non-combat gameplay?
Yeah, I found it a lot of this game I would describe as comfort food, and I did find a lot of the gameplay to be that it very much comfort food. If you've played these kind of games, if you've played Ubisoft games, you kind of know what you're getting into. It's nothing special, like you said. The towns, I pretty much disregarded them other than for fast travel. Um, I honestly didn't even run through most of the towns that were actually inhabited by people because uh, I guess I'll just mention this here as an aside. The whole economy of purchasing and selling things, completely unnecessary. You can bypass it entirely with the crafting system. I don't think I ever once purchased or sold anything in this entire game, which again, I think a little bit speaks to just having too many systems in a game, and uh, some of them become irrelevant or less, at least less
Mm-hmm.
important than others. So yeah, I pretty much bypassed most towns except to grab the fast travel points. As far as exploring ruins, which are, you know, ruins of from our time, from the bad humans who destroyed the planet, and you'll run through these decrepit um, houses or skyscrapers or whatever, and you'll scrounge through sofa cushions and open up drawers and open up ovens and grab all this nonsense that's inside, right?
Toilets.
Toilets. I found that to be fun. I mean, it is what it is. It at a certain point, yeah, it kind of starts to feel a little tedious, but even throughout my entire playthrough, I just found it psychologically enjoyable. Again, that comfort food feeling.
I liked
The
the ones where you'd
colors,
be in like little skyscrapers where there was some type of loot in one of them, but you couldn't get up there, so you'd have to go into a different building, find a way up, and
yeah,
like shimmy across like a little tightrope line. The ones that
totally.
required a little bit of not platforming, but kind of that 3D
Yeah,
traversal.
platforming, puzzling a little bit. Yeah,
Those were a lot more fun, I think, than just the basic like run into a room, open a chest.
yeah. I actually enjoyed it. I would go into a one of the ruins and for the most part enjoy trying to find all of
Yeah.
the treasure within it. I did have one complaint though regarding that. Sometimes you're missing one, and it's just so hard to find. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it glitches and it's not glowing, or it would have been great if maybe later in the game you could have. And maybe there is. Maybe I never found it, but I don't think there's anything that like kind of a compass that shows you where items are.
Yeah.
I think that would have been really helpful because there did come a few points where I would have like just explored and explored three times over this town, and I cannot
Mm-hmm.
find the last piece. And you know that part of my brain that wants to like get the when you finish a settlement, it turns yellow on the map instead of white, and you know it's that completionist feeling, and that would really bug me. But all in all, I had fun with it. The puzzle design was laughable. Um, your character's intellect is supposed to impact your ability to complete puzzles. It gives you a certain amount of moves to
Mm-hmm.
finish a puzzle, and we'll throw some video up of these puzzles. But I mean, they're like kindergarten grade puzzles. You're matching colors,
I mean, you are
and
a squirrel, so
That's fair. That's fair. I'm not a
No,
squirrel though, so that's not fair.
I,
Um,
I might be
Zach might be a squirrel. We'll get
a
into that
collection of
later.
squirrels in a trench coat.
So I was a little bummed that the puzzle design was so reductive and like simplistic. At the same time, I still
It was a
comfort food.
little
I still
satisfying
I
still. Like,
still
yeah,
had fun just matching the colors
they were
like a
fun.
5-year-old,
They were fun 5-year-old puzzles. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know if you've ever been around like
I was a
younger
little
kids or
ashamed of how much I enjoyed them, I guess.
same. It's like if you've ever been around younger kids and they have those puzzles with just the big pieces and there's like 8 of them and you're just like doop 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 doop. I did it. Like it kind of felt like that. And
Like I
so
did it, stupid kids. I'm so smart.
I did it so quick. Yeah, the puzzles I thought they were mildly enjoyable though like laughably easy. I never had any issues with any of the puzzles. I will say they at least varied them. It wasn't all exactly the same puzzle type. They were similar, but
They
they
were
did a
visually represented different,
yeah,
even
and
though
so
the
they'd have
concept was the same.
the concept was always you have some type of switches that have a yellow side and a white side, and you have to match those up in the correct sequence to unlock the puzzle. But sometimes it would be like the dials of a TV or like the antenna of a TV. Sometimes you're aligning the pieces of a vinyl record player and you have to find like the record to put on it and then assemble it and so that you could play the music. Sometimes it's like knobs on a microwave or a toaster oven. uh, so there was actually quite a bit of variance in like how where you saw this type of puzzle, but the core mechanic was basically the same. So I have to say kudos to them for like finding a lot of creative ways to use the puzzle. And I never hated them for the most part, but they were laughably easy. So it's yeah, a little bit of a mixed bag, but they certainly weren't a bad thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's totally fair. Props to them for taking the most simplistic puzzle design and somehow making it relatively fun and engaging, even though it's just insane how simple they were. So, um, I guess that's pretty much everything. I would overall say it's fun. It's fun looting through cushions and seeing colors pop up and getting new gear.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel about this? Is a little bit to do with that since we're not getting into combat just yet, but the different biomes and mutations that allow you to enter certain biomes, right? Whether they're hot, cold, or um, poisonous. Um, how did you feel the engagement with those biomes were? Like in Breath of the Wild, you have to keep some heat with you so you can go up somewhere warm. Did you ever kind of get that feeling, or did they not quite hit it?
I feel like they didn't quite hit it, though they were trying. So I feel like I may not have fully understood this correctly, but you can essentially level up your resistance to these different types of environments. So there's hot environments, cold environments. There's like a couple of different types of toxic or radioactive environments. Um, and it never felt clear to me exactly how much resistance I needed. I guess it's tricky because you could kind of say
Oh,
that about
really?
Breath of the yeah, yeah. So like um, there would be times where like I would level up my resistance, but my there's still a percentage counter going down, and it just never felt super clear to me. Like, is there a way to completely get rid of this, or
Yeah, you
I
just
just
missed that on your character screen. If you go over to mutations, or it might be on your gear screen, it literally tells you a percentage from 0 to 100 that you have resistance to each of them.
see. I wish they would have put that on the same screen as the one where you can like level up the upgrades because when you go to
I think it is.
spend, is it? Because I
Yeah, I
spent a
think
lot
it
of time
is.
spending that
I'm
currency
pretty
and
sure.
never saw. I'll have
I
to
don't know how
check.
you missed it, but yeah, if I would get naked, right? Because your clothes, the different clothes that you can wear, can
Mm.
change your resistances to each biome. And so to see where I was actually at, like base, I would get completely rat naked and go over to that screen and be like, okay, I have 20% resistance to heat. Let me bump that to
Mm.
30, 40. And eventually I got them
Got it.
all high enough that I could wear whatever I wanted aesthetically and have 100% in everything. So
Yeah, my eventual approach is I just ignored those places for a long time, earned a bunch of the currency I'm forgetting what the currency is called, but a bunch of the things that let you upgrade that, and then I just upgraded them a bunch until it was mostly not an issue. Eventually, I found a hot suit as well that lets you go in hotter places.
yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I feel like that wasn't communicated super clearly, but maybe I'm just an idiot. But
I
I
think this might be one of those cases because I think it was pretty clearly communicated with percentages. And so to clarify a little bit, there's a couple different ways to deal with this, right? There's like an area that's really hot, and so you
hmm
can't go there because you'll burn. And like you said, a counter will start to go up from 1 to 100%. When you reach 100%, you start taking damage. And depending on the percentage of your resistance to that element, the counter will go slowly. Like if you're 80% resistant, it'll move very slowly. Whereas if you have no resistance, it'll almost instantaneously go to 100%.
hmm
So you have different upgrade points you can use to increase your resistance to each of them. I think about 10% at a time. So you can spend those points there, but those points can also be spent elsewhere to gain new abilities. So it's kind of a, you know, catch 22. But you can also get certain clothing that has more resistance to heat or cold or, um, like you said, poison, or what did you say that was more accurate? Radioactivity,
hmm
radioactivity. Um, and then also, like you said, there are specific suits that you can find throughout the world via side quests, that are like, this is a cold suit, this is a hot suit, and then you have 100% resistance to that biome. You just throw it on and you can wander around. So for me personally, I didn't have any sort of communication issues. It was all clear enough to me. I found it to be mostly trivial as well. There was never, almost from the beginning of the game, I had almost no difficulty traversing these areas because after playing for an hour or two, I went through all my gear and just grabbed everything that had radioactive resistance, and more or less I was able to travel around. And as the more you play, the more gear you get, the more points
Yeah.
you get. There was almost never a point where I came to somewhere and I was like, "Oh man, I want to explore this, but I can't because I don't have what I need." It felt it felt very trivial and arbitrary. I do like conceptually. I love when games do that. I feel like maybe they could have turned the dial up a little bit more and made it a little bit harder to explore them.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not really what this game is doing. It's very arcade like in a lot of ways. Visually, I really liked each of the areas. They're very distinct when you enter them. I mean, you enter a hot area and you can see the heat waves, and it's very mirage like. The cold areas obviously are blizzard and snowy. Radioactive has this green fog everywhere. I'll have to look up what the other one is called. I was trying to find it. It's
It's
a
like poison,
purple
poison or toxic, but it's like
poison,
it's like a
toxic.
purple haze.
Yeah, so everything's purple and hazy. And then the last one is oxygen. Uh,
Hypoxia.
dep-
Yeah.
yeah, hypoxia. So there's not enough oxygen in
And
the
it's
air,
kind of
which is
like
not visually representative, but
things kind of turn gray and bleak a little bit.
yeah,
They almost felt like Death Stranding areas where
yeah,
I don't know.
totally, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think these areas actually contributed to making the world feel distinct visually,
I'd agree.
because whenever you entered one, you knew
hmm
what the area was. It was
Yeah.
very communicative in that way, and so yeah,
And
I overall enjoyed it.
I kind of treated it like I do Elden Ring, where it's like, I don't know, I'm not ready for this. I don't have anything that's helping me. I'll just come back later. And that's what I did. Like later in the game, I'd be like, oh, I still need to go do quests in these areas, fast
So then
travel,
I think it
jump in.
worked as intended for
I think it
you,
worked okay. Yeah. They were
because I
still,
think that's their goal, right? That's their goal, is to give you something like, oh, I can't do this yet. I need to do this to come back here.
yeah. Yeah. I didn't have
Somehow I
too much of an
broke it.
issue with that as a concept, other than the fact that I was kind of confused about how the specific mechanics worked. But I mean, I understood the core concept, so it wasn't really an issue.
Okay, so from there, do you want to go into? We've got a couple different systems here. Should we go into combat, or would you like to go into more of the writing morality system?
Maybe let's do combat. We could do
Okay, let's
combat
get into
and
combat.
then yeah.
Go
I
for it.
uh
Yeah, what do you think?
I think the combat was mostly fun. Um there's a lot of different systems at play here, and I feel like for the most part they were enjoyable. At times it felt like things were getting away from them just a little bit, but you have your melee combat and there's a variety of different weapons you can use, whether that's big swords or smaller like knives, or like unarmed combat. You also have ranged combat, whether that's guns or bow and arrow, crossbow, boomerang, nunchucks. Um, and then you also have your like special abilities, like your psi abilities. And there's a lot of different abilities. Like there's one where you can do an AoE ice blast, which freezes people and makes the ground slippery. You can bolt around and leave a trail of fire, You can have a rock fist come up from the ground and hit people. You can do the lightning you talked about earlier, which is kind of the Star Wars Darth Sidious lightning that kind of chains between different enemies. That was probably my favorite ability. A lot of different abilities there, and I think the good thing is I think it gave you a nice mix of things to do, and so occasionally combat with large groups of enemies felt a little tedious, where it would just be like some of the larger enemies, it occasionally felt bullet spongy, where it's just like I just have to hit them a ton and then they die. It's not necessarily the most challenging thing, it just takes a little while. That occasionally was frustrating, but I think what helped alleviate it was the fact that, you know what, I've been smacking these people with my sword for a while. Now I'm going to start chain lightning them. Okay, I'm out of energy. I'm going to hop back and start shooting them with my gun a little bit. Now I'm going to run back and start smacking them with a sword again. Depending on the type of enemy too, you have to adjust a little bit. Like some of the bigger enemies will swing at you really hard when you're close, and you can get up and fight them with melee, but sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth. So you dodge under their legs, or you just get back and use ranged. Whereas some of the smaller ones, it might make more sense to use your melee weapons. So overall, combat was pretty fun. It mostly felt good. Occasionally, it was slightly clunky and like wouldn't target the right enemy, or sometimes there's this thing that happens in combat where like slow motion will occasionally happen, that can like throw off your rhythm, or at least for me, it threw off my rhythm occasionally. So there were some like slightly janky elements here and there, but for the most part, it was pretty fun. What do you think?
Yeah, my quick take on combat is that um, everything, your abilities, everything you can do feels very good and is awesome and has a ton of cool factor, feels great. But the interaction between you and the enemies often feels not great.
Mm-hmm.
Feels janky, right? Everything I'm
Yeah.
doing feels awesome, but the contact and the dance of combat between me and the enemy feels off time, a little awkward sometimes, janky, like you said. I usually enjoy melee combat a lot, and I played a lot of this game, especially in the first half, with melee combat because it takes a while for your psi abilities to kind of catch up power wise. And I didn't love melee combat. The actual melee combat from my end was fine, but there is a parry system, and I just felt like they didn't quite strike the right balance between like, can I cancel moves that I've input? Sometimes there's so much visual feedback, it was hard to tell when an enemy was doing a move to parry. I felt I would get hit a lot without really any sort of visual communication. So that wasn't great. The gunplay feels fine for this game, very arcade like. I ended up playing a lot of this game in the late game with my psi abilities
Same actually.
and guns, which I thought was very fun. But that kind of keeps you at arm's length from the enemies, and you don't have to deal with the jank as much. And I think that's why it's more fun. Um, the psi abilities are awesome later in the game. I mean, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
the lightning, the fingertip lightning ability, Darth Sidious, and then you can also get a levitate ability as well as a telekinesis ability. So I don't know if any of you have played Control out there, but I was cosplaying as Jesse from Control with my little rat dude, like just levitating around, ripping boulders out of the ground and hurling them at enemies, and then zapping them all with lightning. Like, I mean, how does that not sound incredibly awesome? And it is. So it's definitely a mixed bag here. But yeah, that's my best way to describe it. Is everything you do feels very cool, but when you get too close to interacting to the enemies, you kind of see that jank start to shine through.
I think that's a great way to put it. I also found that even with the ranged combat, I felt that often where it feels good to fire your weapon, but like aiming and kind of how it targets the enemies often felt a bit chaotic and not super clear. Like you just kind of you point at them, sometimes it's on, sometimes it goes wide, and you just kind of keep reorienting your reticule so that you can aim as best as possible. I'm not saying I need some crazy aim assist so I don't have to do anything, but it didn't quite feel like that was matching up with the way I'd expect it to behave, but it was he was usable.
Yeah.
So I'd agree that the psi abilities were all a blast, and that's why I would kind of switch between them. I got a really great melee weapon in the like last 10% of the game that made me switch back to melee at the very end, and we can maybe talk about that in a minute. But um, for the most part, I agree with melee.
Yeah. So I think combat for me is very neutral. It gets the job done. It's never anything I was like looking forward to, but I also was kind of having fun while I was doing it. It's kind of a net neutral for me. Quick shout out. This kind of falls under traversal, but I didn't think of it because now we're talking about abilities a little bit more in combat. There's an ability you can get to grow a mushroom with
Mm-hmm.
one of your psi abilities. Early in the game, I was like, that's dumb, whatever. It's pretty cheap and I didn't have many abilities, so I grabbed it. That is actually a very enjoyable like ability to use both in combat. You can just bounce enemies on their bouncy mushrooms. They're essentially like a trampoline. And it's hilarious to use. And then also it felt really cool because it'll grow the mushroom about 5 feet in front of you. And so you would be sprinting towards this big wall, just use the ability, grow a mushroom, and just hop like 20 feet over the wall. Like it just was very satisfying to use. So anyway, shout out to the mushroom. Shout out to mushrooms. So so from combat, let's talk real quick about bosses. There's not too many in this game. There's I would say 5 total. What's your cliff notes on your feelings about bosses?
Mostly, uh, I would say I'm skewing a little bit negative on the bosses. Here's the thing: I like the concepts they were going for. I like what they tried. What they were trying to do is kind of evident, and I liked it. It's the execution didn't land it most of the time. The creatures were cool. So, I mean, I guess let's separate. There's, I guess, two different camps of bosses. There are the um, kind of the warlord leaders of each of the zone bandit encampments, which are smaller bosses, I'd say for the most part, and
Yeah, I didn't even consider those as bosses, honestly.
they were kind of forgettable in my opinion. But the world eater bosses, those are kind of the main four, not counting the last boss. Um, there's one in each kind of corner of the map, and they're these giant, still kind of Seussian horror creatures, like adorable horrific creatures, fuzzy and ginormous, and they were cool. I liked them aesthetically. Um, but they varied. So uh, the first one I fought was in the archipelago aquatic area where you're on your little goo glide and you're kind of sprinting around on the water. And in the concept of that is so cool. They had these little bombs floating in the water, and the idea was you're supposed to goo glide up to a bomb, pick it up, and then try and like drop it in the radius of the creature so that it does some damage. And you keep doing that until it gets to a certain threshold. In execution, that just did not work for me. Um, the goo glide was fun, but the kind of the speed and rhythm of the monster's attacks made it really hard to do anything but just avoid those attacks for the most part, which it was doable, but I found it to be mostly frustrating and tiring. And then the little bombs for this particular boss, I think this was the I don't remember which one this was, but the little bombs you pick up, it didn't work half the time, and then when you try and drop them, they wouldn't explode at the right place. When they did explode on the creature, they did very little damage, to the point where it made more sense just to damage it through the other means available. So it kind of defeated the purpose of what they were trying to do, and in the end I was able to beat the boss, but it was kind of a long drawn out and frustrating experience, which is a bummer because like you're in a giant water area on a Star Wars glider zipping around this creature, and so that was a bummer. But some of the later bosses I liked better, especially the underwater boss when you're in the octopod, the Merc Puff, I believe, and that one is it's like a kind of an aquatic giant tortoise or turtle like creature, and you're swimming around this underwater arena as it like chases you and swings at you, and you're trying to kill it. So that one was a lot cooler. But yeah, I think overall they were trying some cool things that just didn't work. What do you think?
Yeah, so I have the boss names here. They're Jumbo Puff, Porky Puff, Hoof Puff, and Mark Puff.
So easy to
and
keep
then
those
the
clear.
and then the outlier boss is Lupa Lupin, your arch nemesis throughout the game. So yeah, all these puffs you got to fight. They were one of the few marked negatives for me in this game. I looked forward to them. I kind of do this thing where I was intending to do everything first and then go fight the bosses. Save the best for last is what I tend to do. And after fighting one of them, I was like, oh, never mind. Let me just go get these done. The bosses, I think they try to do very specific mechanics in the boss fights, and unfortunately, what it amounts to is that unlike in regular combat, where you have enough variety and different means at which you can keep combat at an arm's length or avoid the jank. You cannot avoid the jank in these boss fights. The
Yeah.
the jank is just incredibly apparent and really just takes the steam out of these fights. I found them to be anticlimactic and just kind of a low light for the game, which is
Just
unfortunate for any
not
game.
fun. I like
Not that fun.
I wish the mechanics worked, because the idea of, oh, throwing bombs at this thing, and there's another
Yeah,
one where you tether to its like fangs and pull its teeth out. I'm like, in concept that sounds so neat, but in practice it was tedious,
yeah, it's just too
boring,
janky.
janky, and it's a bummer.
Agreed. So there were some cool moments, though. I mean, one of the bosses, I think this was the first one I fought, which is the Mech Ton boss over in the
Mhm.
southwestern corner. The final phase, he straight up swallows you, and you go like inside of him and have to like destroy his heart. It's super intense, but
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Metal.
Like you said, the concept of the jet ski fight is cool. It didn't quite work in execution, and then I think by far I guess depending on who you ask, this wouldn't be the final boss fight, but the final of the ones destroying the world tree,
Mhm.
um, which you said you think is which one?
The northeastern boss world eater is the Merc Puff, and that's the underwater one.
Northwestern, I think. But yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah,
Merc Puff.
northwestern. That's what I meant.
That one was by far the best one, I think. It introduces an entirely new mechanic. You go through this quest, you build basically a submarine octopus type thing, and all of a sudden you're underwater doing a completely different thing than you've done the entire game, and you fight, like you said, this giant turtle, fluffy furry turtle creature, which is bizarre underwater. And I felt the jank in that fight was much less apparent. It actually
Mhm.
worked and it felt good to control, and it was by far the most enjoyable boss fight of the bunch. But overall, I'd have to throw a negative on this. I found them to be um, parts of the game that I looked forward to the least while I was playing through it. So
Well, I think that takes us pretty naturally into the final boss, which I want to talk about. Was it Luna
talking about
Lupin
Lupa
or
Lupin.
Lupa Lupin, Luma Luna
See, for
Nuki?
me, I fought Lupa Lupin before I went and fought the underwater boss. So,
Really, I fought Oompa
but I
Loompa at the very end.
Oompa Loompa. So I would agree. Narratively, he is the final boss for your character's arc. Go ahead. What do you have to say about Oompa Loompa?
Oh, what a tedious boss. I did not have a lot of fun with
Really?
him. Yeah.
Huh.
Because I found his close range abilities were pretty powerful, so he would take down my health really quick, so I'd go to distance. I actually didn't spend as much time leveling up my ranged abilities. A lot of my combat style later in the game was electricity, and then I unlocked this fire sword, um, that is like a legendary sword. It's always on fire, and
Yeah,
it
that thing is
like
cool.
is super
The
cool.
quest
So
to find that is super cool too.
it
Like
is.
the
That was
room
one
you
of my
find it
favorite.
in.
That was
Yeah.
one of my favorite parts of the game. So I had some good abilities, but he would just do so much damage up front that half the time I was avoiding him. And something else, I didn't pay attention to like health packs for the whole game. I didn't buy them. I didn't know where they were. I'd occasionally use one, but I unlocked an
Creatures
ability.
dropped him everywhere though, right?
They did, but I didn't collect that many for whatever reason. And I had an ability where you could inject for health, but basically I had a handful of health packs going into this boss, and I just depleted them in the first phase. And he does the Dark Souls thing where he has a really long health bar that takes a while to whittle down. You finally kill him, and then he pounds through the earth. You fall down into a cavern, and his health bar completely regenerates. You have to fight him again. And the issue is not that he was a little more difficult. It was that I just found it to be not a super fun boss fight. Maybe
Well,
in part,
difficulty takes a steep turn or a sharp turn when there's jank and when the gameplay isn't great to begin with, right?
right?
Difficulty
Exactly.
is only fun when you die, it's your fault, right?
Yeah, when it's tuned correctly, and it didn't feel
Yeah.
like that. And it felt like I was able to do it. Like it only took me, I think I got it on my second or third try. It wasn't super hard, but it was just long and tedious. And I remember it took me, I felt like half an hour. I don't think it was actually half an hour, but it felt like I was just playing this boss forever, and I wasn't having a lot of fun with it. And I think that's my biggest issue is it's like there were so many fun parts of the game, and I think what they were intending to do with this boss again on paper sounded kind of cool, but the execution just didn't land for me, and so it left me with a bad taste in my mouth for the entirety of boss experiences, and was kind of just a frustrating end. I saved that till the very end of my experience, and it just kind of left me frustrated. Like, okay, I did it. I'm glad that's done. Not I didn't feel a ton of satisfaction because I was like, I knew I could do this. It was just tedious to do, versus like bosses in a Souls game where it's like that was a nightmare. I can't believe I did it. That's kind of the difference of feelings I had there.
Yeah. I don't have too much to say about it. Like I said, this was a road bump for me. Like I didn't even do it at the end. And kids out there, if you want to be a Sith Lord and not worry about what Zach just talked about, just be a Psi freak. And like I said, my abilities all healed me while doing damage.
Yeah,
So
see, I didn't have that.
I just kind of wandered around him shooting electricity at him and killed him. It didn't feel much different than some of the world like mini bosses, honestly.
Mm.
So
Which that's a
I could
problem in
definitely,
another way, maybe, but
yeah, I agree. But considering the combat wasn't a highlight of the game for me, I would argue
mm,
that's probably the more enjoyable way to play. So keep that in
yeah.
mind as you start out, if you're starting out. And let's see, let's as we try and bring this thing home.
I think there's
I
two
want to
things
talk.
I could think of. One is the dark
Yeah,
and
well,
light.
let me
One is
know. Okay,
I'll
yeah.
yeah. One is the dark and light system. The other is story. I'd like to talk about those
Okay, so
things.
yeah, I was gonna say writing and the morality system. So
Okay,
let's
there we
go
go.
ahead and you pick either of those. Go ahead and say what you have to say about those two parts of the
Yeah,
game.
I'll start with the morality system. I found that to be pointless. Well, it's not completely pointless, which I found out later in the game because I wasn't paying attention. And that is that
That's
some
a
of
running
your,
theme here.
yeah, I think always assume your players are not fully paying attention. You need to teach them how to pay attention.
Build your
Um,
game as if Zach is playing
Honestly, yes, seriously.
it.
Um, so I think the key thing with the morality system that feels like it matters is that you can unlock certain psionic abilities that are different depending on if you skew dark or light. So when you do certain tasks that either give you dark points or light points, it kind of ranks up your level for that morality. And for some of the final abilities, like there's one I forget what it's called, but it's like this area of effect Nova ability that requires I think 20 dark points. And I wasn't paying it. I just saw that ability was there and was like, oh, I can't wait to get that. And I finally had 20 points and I went to look and I was like, oh man, I went light because I usually go light. Even in video games, I feel like a bad person if I'm like malicious to others.
You are
So
weak.
I like to think I'm good, deeply good. Um, but yeah, so I wish they had kind of, I don't know. I don't feel like the morality system added anything to me that was enjoyable. It was just kind of there. I don't think it was a huge detriment, other than the fact that you kind of get different abilities depending on what you go down. Um, I don't know. It was kind of meh. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I think thematically they were trying to use the morality system. Obviously, the theming of this game is repairing the Earth, and the bad humans did all the bad things and destroyed the planet. And you know, are you going to be good or bad? So they were trying to deliver a message, but I think in the end, the morality system simply was a means to an end, gameplay wise. Where I mean, like you said, and I found this out early on because my whole shtick with my character was I'm a psi freak. So I looked at these abilities. I was like, all right, what am I going to do? This is dark. This is light. Well, you don't even have to pick a lane really because you can do 20. You can make 20 light decisions and 20 dark decisions and have 20 points in each, right?
Mm,
Or 30 in each, and then unlock everything, which is eventually what I ended up doing. And I did skew towards light at the end, but it's very trivial. And once again, one of these mechanics where just very surface level, not fully fleshed out. And I'm not sure that I would want them to have. I think they would have had to put a great deal of effort into restructuring this game to actually make the morality system have depth. And I don't know that that would have been worth the time investment for me personally. So in the end, it's funny, but it does kind of lend towards a more comical feeling when interacting with the morality system. I mean, I have a couple notes here. The morality system was often unclear. So
mhm,
this one time, I there's a fruit stand, and there's all this fruit, and there's these creatures lined up to get some food, right? and there's a little prompt in the world. Whenever there's something you can interact with, there's a visual indicator. So I go up and I'm like, oh, it's this. I hit the indicator and I light the fruit stand on fire, and like everyone runs away in terror. And I'm like, oh,
That happened to me
interesting.
too.
That was not terribly clear, but okay.
That
So
happened.
it's,
That exact thing happened to me.
yeah, I was just like, okay, totally meant to light all of their food on fire like a horrible villain. But so it's not always clear, and it's also sometimes just comically shallow. Like when you save people from bandit camps, they're in a little cage. You unlock them from the cage. You're given a prompt. They say, "Oh, I need help," and you're like, "Help them, don't help them." Right? That's
Yeah.
it. And if you help them, they just walk away, and you're a good person. Like nothing happens.
Yeah.
And then if you don't help them, you just like uppercut punch them in the face, and then they just like pass out on the ground,
Uh,
and then you're a bad person. Like it's just
yeah.
it's very comical, and in a way I wouldn't change it because it is comical. Like every
Yeah.
time it happened I was like, this is so ridiculous.
It's like it's
uh,
so bad it's good.
yeah,
But
yeah, it's
yeah.
just, it is what it is. I mean, they would have had to work so much harder to make it feel,
Yeah.
take it seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other things where you can catch creatures and you either kill them or pet them, and that makes you a good or a bad person, right? So
Uh,
the morality system was, in the end, just more comical than anything you could take seriously, and just ended up being like a currency that you could use to unlock abilities, is all it was for me.
now every
It
time I see
doesn't,
my pets, I'm like, should I kill you or
should I
pet you?
pet you or kill you? Depends on the
My
day.
yeah.
um, but it does influence later in the game, and we won't touch on this because this is going too long already. But there's an arc at the end that you can leave the planet on, right? Whether you save it or destroy the planet, and you get to pick 4 of your homies that you meet throughout the journey, and depending on how much of a total dirtbag you are, or how good of a person you are, certain people will ask to come with you or not, right? So there are different things, there are different layers to the morality system. Um, Also works in tandem with the tribes, which we didn't talk much about, but there are tribes throughout this game. Again, I
Yeah.
feel not very fleshed out, very tedious. Oftentimes, you would get to, they're like these castles or fortifications you can enter, and you'll get to them, and you do some MacGuffin gameplay mechanic, and then you get to the leader, and you can either fight the leader or you can persuade the leader. And it's humorous because every time I would persuade the leader, because I'm like, I don't want to fight these guys, combat's not that great, and it would say, oh, your odds are like 50%, and if you don't win this, you'll lose 1 point in intellect or something. So it's like, oh, it's scary. Every single time it worked. The guy was
Yeah.
like, ah, good point, I surrender. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of comical at the end, because it would say like, oh, you have a 30% chance, and then he would surrender. So
Yeah.
I don't even think there was any dice or anything rolling in the background.
I
I
had
think
the
it just
same.
works.
I did it. I persuaded once, and I was like, "Huh, I wonder how easy this is." And I started doing that for a lot of them. It never failed once for me.
Yeah.
So
So I don't think they finished whatever RNG is supposed to be going on there, which again is comical. So
yeah.
a lot of the morality and these different systems feel very paper thin. So just know that going into it. I think a lot of people were really, really excited about the tribes and the different politics and the morality system, and they kind of got themselves worked up into thinking this was going to be some larger than life project with all these complex variables and systems at work. And it's just not. I mean, it's a double A studio, their first game. So me coming in with lower expectations, I was able to find it humorous,
Mm-hmm.
instead of being completely disappointed. So regarding the writing, hit or miss. I mean, it was sometimes dry and funny, like I mentioned, the hitchhiker narrator, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I did pull one quote from the game I thought was just kind of funny and indicative of when this game can be funny in its very dry way. I was talking to one character, and he was this very frivolous. He was morally frivolous, like, hunt or be hunted, right? And so your character asks him, is like, "Oh, you kill whoever you like?" And then the prompt comes up, and he mumbles some gibberish, and the prompt says he mostly kills whoever he dislikes. And I just was like, that's pretty good. That was pretty funny. So that's the kind of humor you're going to get. All in all, the writing is nothing special to write home about, but I did get a couple kicks throughout the game. I don't know if you have anything that stood out to you narratively or
There were
writing
a
wise.
couple of chuckles. A couple of the side quests had some kind of amusing things. Like at one point, you're helping some alcoholic large creature get his fix of radioactive booze, and there's just some humorous things like that were kind of fun. Dialogue was kind of whatever, like you said. The larger story, the larger writing and story, I did not care about at all. Like, was not really interested in where the world was going. Didn't care about the arc. Didn't care about like who to offer seats to. I just kind of did it randomly. Didn't feel invested in it in any way. So I would have to say the overall writing and story is a miss for me, but not in a way like it doesn't feel like that's what this game is
That's not
really.
the point of the game. Yeah.
It's not the point of the game, so it doesn't detract horribly, but I do find it disappointing. I always enjoy good story elements in a game, even if it's not the point. So I hold it against it a little bit. It was disappointing, but you can still enjoy the game. And just I didn't go into it expecting amazing story, so I wasn't like way off in my expectations. But yeah, I think it wasn't the best.
Yeah, I would agree. You're not going to be blown away by the story. Don't go into it expecting to be impressed. It's just there. It just moves the plot along. It's just to give you a reason to go do the things, right? So, um, okay. As we wrap this up here, are there any other extraneous, maybe more peripheral things that you want to call attention to? Things that stood out you liked, that stood out you didn't, that don't really fit into these broader categories.
I think we actually hit everything I had. The fire sword was going to be the last thing I touched on, but I kind of mentioned that later in the game. There's this quest where someone's like, I can tell you this secret area if you want. And you could persuade them or intimidate them. And I managed to persuade them again because I never fail a persuasion apparently. And it gives you
Very
the
persuasive.
location in this archipelago, this island. And you go there, you kind of solve a little puzzle, and you find this legendary sword. It's like a broadsword or a great sword that's on fire. And I used that for the rest of the game, and it was fantastic. I used light enemies on fire. It was like probably 20 to 30% higher damage than the
Yeah.
the other my most powerful melee weapon at the time. So it was a step up. Um, it was a cool quest. It was satisfying to unlock it and find it. And then I had a blast using it. I felt like I found it at the right time too. I was probably 10 to 15% from the end. So I got a good amount of usage out of that sword. I didn't feel like sometimes you find the best weapon literally at the end. And if it's a game that you're excited enough to do a new game plus about, great. I'm not really feeling that for this game. So I'm glad that I found it early enough to enjoy it, but not so early that it was maybe horribly, horribly broken. But that was the
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to call out. And that was a nice touch. I think this game is an exercise in contrasts because it falls flat in so many ways, but they put these little fun, creative things throughout the game. And I wasn't expecting that when I found it. And it kind of gave me a second wind of excitement and enjoyment and discovery near the end of the game.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have a few things, but I'll kind of launch there from what you just mentioned. My quick little summarization of this game and its pros and cons. Um, Regarding the open world, I told you I feel like this world would have been so much better off if they had shrunk the scope of it by about 30%. And I don't necessarily know that that means the map needs to be 30% smaller. Maybe the map stays exactly the same, but like you said, the sword quest where you go find this epic sword back in this cave, and it's like it's on this glowing rock formation with a tree behind it. It's very cool. Very um, cool set dressing where you find this thing. There were a lot of memorable quests in this game, I thought, which I continue to be impressed with. Very cool side quests, some references. Subnautica Station. There's a side
Mm-hmm.
quest that totally is referencing God of War. You meet this character who's like obsessed with home. Home is what's most important, and he wants you to go find a carrot. And you're like, what is happening here? You go find a carrot, and he puts it on a stick, and his home rises out of the ground, and it's a giant turtle, and it starts in real time walking across the world with you on it. And it was just one of those like, whoa, this is so cool, so memorable. There were quite a few of those, and these are side missions, completely missable. But there's also, for every one of those really cool side missions, there's 10 completely repetitive markers on your map and a lot of busy work. And a lot of open world games fall into this trap. If they had just kind of reduced the amount of busy work, so you didn't have to sift through so much busy work to get to those cool side quests, cool experiences, I think that would have helped with the fatigue a lot, because part of it towards the latter half of the game was, okay, let me try and sift through this and find out what I actually want to experience that's unique and what is just more of what I've already done. And you kind of have to dig. So but just shout out to the side quests. There are some really good ones, some very memorable ones, which you don't often get in open world games. A lot of times, the main content is where all the effort goes, and the side quests are completely forgettable. I didn't find that to be the case here. And as far as glitches, there were a few glitches. Had a couple enemies that glitched out, and like I couldn't find them, so I had to reload the game or fast travel very far away and come back, and then they were there. Um, Sometimes it's unclear. There's like a, remember I said there's a visual indicator in the world of things you can interact with. Sometimes that'll show up, but you haven't yet done a side quest or something that allows you to interact with that object. And
Yeah,
so it'll
that
show
one
up
was
from a
annoying.
distance. It'll show up from a distance, and then you get close to it and there's no prompt to interact with it, and you feel like it's broken, when what's really happening is later on you'll get an actual quest that then
Mhm.
kind of unlocks your ability to interact with it. But it feels very unintuitive and can create the confusion of, I think this is bugged out. So stuff like that. There are some glitches you'll experience throughout the, I mean, it's a big world. I think for the most part, I didn't deal with anything game breaking or that ruined my experience, which is impressive. And then I guess we didn't touch on this, so I'll just briefly say the customization, the crafting is pretty solid, because as we're running through the world, as you're digging through the couch cushions, as you're digging through the fridge, you're going to find all manner of weapon parts, like just trash and different things that will be, you can turn into weapons, guns, melee weapons, things like that. You can go into your inventory and craft a gun from scratch from this trash that you found. You can build a gun, whether it's a more of a rifle or a pistol. There's a lot of different ways to customize and craft your own gear. And I didn't interact with it a ton, but at various points throughout the campaign, I did find, okay, this weapon's not really doing anything anymore. Let me dig into my crafting and see what these legendary pieces I found, if I attach them. Oh, look, my damage goes up by 200. Oh, look, I like the appearance of this one a little better. It does slightly less damage. That's a fair trade-off for me. I thought the crafting system was pretty cool. And as much as I didn't engage with it throughout the entire experience, I did find it enjoyable and somewhat necessary. And so in that way, I don't think it was like half baked or anything. I think it worked pretty well, and I was able to build some cool melee weapons, some cool guns throughout my time.
I had a similar experience with crafting, and my one wish is that they had better incentivized you to use crafting earlier on so that you can enjoy more of a variety of some of the weapons you can craft before getting to the later game. But overall, I thought the crafting was pretty good.
Yeah. So just so you know, that's what you're doing with all the trash that you find, because we forgot to mention that in the
Save
there's
that
so
trash.
save that trash. There's so many systems in this game. I
Yeah.
swear we've still missed two or three.
Hmm.
But for better and worse, they added a lot to this game. And on the one hand, it adds a lot of kind of variety to what you're doing, even though a lot of it can feel tedious. There is a pretty substantial amount of variety compared to most open world games. On the other hand, a lot of it, once you've messed with the system for any length of time, you say, okay, that's kind of a dead end there. That's as far as it goes. So, um, yeah, I guess with all this to tie up in a neat little bow, um, where do you land on this game? What's your closing thought and your score, your recommendation?
Yeah.
We'll do
Uh,
out of 10, right?
yeah, let's do out of 10. I think we've decided that's easiest for us to keep track of. Um, Overall, I would recommend this game. I had fun with it. It's a mixed bag. There are some highs and some laughable lows. But I think overall it skews positive as an experience. I've kind of gone back and forth between like 6.5 and 7. Kind of, it's definitely above average for me, um, but um, arguably barely. But some of the things that shine really nicely about it, some of these cool quests, fun abilities, ambitious decisions, I think bump it up a little more than that. And so I think I'm going to land on 7 out of 10. I think this is absolutely worth playing if you enjoy open world style games. If any of the different elements or the kind of the style in the video clips we're showing seem appealing, I definitely think this is worth checking out, especially if you can get it on a sale. I think it's absolutely worth $20 pretty easily. And there's a lot of game to be played here. So I would recommend it. I had fun with it. And I think my closing thoughts are that I'm excited to see what the studio, what is it, 101 Studios, I'm excited to see what they do next, because I feel like part of my estimation of this is that this is their first attempt at a game, and I'm impressed with how much they've been able to do relatively well for a first large project. And I'm excited to see them take what they've learned and hopefully refine it, better focus, constrain themselves a little more where needed, but take some of the same big ambitious ideas and some of the same kind of zany creativity to make, whether it's a second Biomutant, which I would happily pick up in the future, or whatever their next IP might be. I think they have a future ahead of them as a studio, and I'm excited for what they do next. And overall, I think this game's worth checking out. What about you?
Yeah, my closing thoughts are: I wish there was a little bit clutter to sift through, but I think this is an excellent example of kind of the more typical open world that we've seen in the past decade, right? We've kind of seen open world start to evolve with Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, and I think personally, for myself, that's where my head's at a little bit more. So this style of open world is starting to feel more and more with all the check markers and busy work and different things telling you where to go and what to do. But as far as that style of open world, I think this is up near the top. I think they did an excellent job with it. I look forward to seeing what they do in the future. Their Experiment 101 is their the developer name, and I would definitely recommend it. I mean, this game is, I think it's $30 retail normally. We got it on sale for $20. I mean, this game's worth $30, I would say. And if it sounds like your jam, definitely pick it up. Do the developers a solid. I think they got hit pretty hard at launch. Whether what percentage of that was fair and what percentage of that was a little over the top, I can't say for sure. But I think there's a lot of merit to this game that probably a lot of people, almost like I did, have kind of missed out on because of those early reviews. So check it out. My score, I think I'm gonna settle on. I've been bouncing between 7.5 and an 8, and for me, a 7 is an incredibly average game, right? IGN and these other places have made 7 average for some reason instead of 5, but that's how my brain works now. So I'm gonna go with an 8. I think it does enough. I enjoyed the experience, and there was enough new and intriguing about this world for at least the first 20 hours that I think this is an 8. It's worth experiencing. It's better than a lot of stuff out there that doesn't make you feel anything, right? At least the bad systems in this game kind of can make you chuckle, or at least they were trying to do something interesting. So that's where I land. 8 out of 10. I would recommend it. Go grab Biomutant on a sale, especially, and check it out. So there you have it. You said 7, 8, so 15 out of 20, 7.5 out of 10. There you go.
There's
NeverLag,
a lot of
seven and a
numbers
half
there.
out of 10.
15 and a half, 7 out of 10 out of 20 out of
That'll be
15.
it. 15 out of 20 from NeverLag.
Pick it
We'll
up
give
on
you
a
out of
$20,
20.
$30 sale, $40 sale, 15 out of 20, $40 sale. There you go, folks.
Well, if it wasn't confusing, you surely made it confusing there. So I think that's it, man. A long discussion here, Biomutant. It's crazy how many systems are in this game, though. It feels
There's
like
a
it
lot to talk about.
never ends. So if you stuck with us, wow, good job. Impressive. Good on you. And thank you. We appreciate you. Remember, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/NeverLag. And you know what? You don't have to be very sad about this being over, even though it was almost 2 hours long, because we're always on the verge of another breakdown. Isn't that right, Zach?
Always. Always
Always.
just around the corner.
All right. Well, that's it from us, and we'll catch you next time on the next breakdown here at NeverLag.